And that is how I recommend you hone your kitchen knives. The rest of this video is going to dive into more detail on the method that I was using, the specifics around the hone that I recommend, and I'll close out with my other tenets of knife care so that you can get the most life out of the edges of your knife. Before we do that, if this is our first time meeting, my name is Matt and I own the American Edge, which is a knife and tool sharpening business in New Hampshire, and I'm also a host at the Guild of Professional Sharpeners. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you find value in this video, and without further ado, let's dive into the specifics around the technique that I was using to hone my kitchen knife. The first thing I want to call attention to is that I am not slinging this thing around like a ninja. I have it very stabilized and under control. I have the end of the hone on a cutting board in the shop, but this would be what you could expect in the kitchen. The next thing I want to call attention to is that I'm doing slow strokes and that I'm using light pressure against the hone and essentially using gravity to slide the knife down the hone. Lastly, I'm being very deliberate about the angle that I'm holding the knife relative to the hone. So let's take a look at that in deeper detail. The next point I would like to talk about is the angle to hold the knife relative to the hone. And for that, I'm going to call on this nice block. Allow this block to represent a knife, where this is the flat face of the knife and these are the bevels that I cut on a knife. These are really hard to see on a real knife, so I've blown it up in this image here. So let's say I cut this bevel at 21 degrees. That's what that angle here represents. It's going to be 21 degrees on either side, which is actually a 42-degree whole angle. But if we hold our knife up to the hone like that, what we want to avoid doing is being too shallow, because now the hone is not touching the edge of the knife. So I'd rather you be at least 21 and maybe even a little bit more, just to make sure that we're actually getting the honing action on the very edge of the knife. Sometimes I might do a knife at a little bit less than 21 degrees, like an 18 or maybe even a 15 for a high performance knife, but still we're going to get the same effect if we train our mind to think a little bit more than 21 degrees. So now I'm going to show you how to do that. What follows here is a simple training aid to help you build confidence in the angle that you're holding your knife relative to the hone. Start with a little square piece of paper and understand that that edge is 90 degrees. If we fold that paper like this, we will have cut that 90-degree angle in half, so we will be left with 45 degrees. Should we do that one more time, we will be left with a little piece of paper that is just about 22.5 degrees. We can snip it so it'll be just about the right size. And if we hold one side against the hone and then bring the knife up to the other side, we can teach ourselves right about what that angle of 22.5 degrees feels like. Before I move on to the specifics of the hone that I recommend, I do want to address the question of how often should I hone my knife. And it reminds me of a story when I was a wee lad and we got an electric chainsaw, and the chainsaw had a little button for the oiler, and I asked my dad, how often should I hit the button? And he said, whenever you think of it, which is a very imprecise amount of oil, but it works. Like if it starts acting funny, give it a little oil, right? Same thing with your knife on the hone. Like if you haven't done it in a while and you're like, geez, I can't remember last time I honed my knife, that's a good time to do it. It's not too much to say you do it every morning, then you go to make your breakfast. So there's no real exact amount of time or frequency, like don't beat yourself up if you don't hit it. Just do it whenever you think of it. Now it is time to discuss the specifics of the hone that I recommend. This is a 12-inch fine grit ceramic hone with natural handle made by Idaho, which is a Colorado-based company. Two things I really love about this hone. First, the fine grit. It's about 1200 grit, and what that means is when I work a knife, I will probably start around a 120 grit, and I'm going to work my way up to about 1000 grit. to finish the edge of a knife. So I want my tool that maintains the edge of the knife to be on the order of the grit that I'm using to finish the knife. Something around 1,000. Like, I don't nitpick it a whole lot, and sometimes I might even take a knife, whatever. So this is a 1200 grit hone. That is because I really like that because it is near the finishing grit that I use when I sharpen kitchen knives. The second thing is that it is made out of ceramic. And when I use abrasives to cut steel in order to build and then refine an edge on a knife, I need to use something that is harder. That's a very specific term, harder than the steel that I'm cutting. And ceramic is harder than any ferrous metal. So I want to recommend a product that I can guarantee is going to be harder, and thereby I will know that it will cut the steel to refine the edge on the knife that you're using. The next thing is where to purchase one of these. So you can go right to Idaho, but I have reached out to Idaho, and I am now a reseller of this Idaho hone. So you can come to me, and I would be very happy to sell you one. And since I have an agreement with Fred over there and I've bought some in bulk, I'm able to offer them to my customers at a reduced rate than what you will find if you look on Idaho or Amazon or anywhere else, and you include shipping on top of that. So I invite you to come check out the hone, and I would love it if you bought it from me. So thank you. And before we close out this video, I do want to offer you the 4 tenets of knife care that I recommend to people for maintaining and caring for the knives in their kitchen. First off is hand wash your knives. Please don't put them in a dishwasher, and hand wash them, dry them immediately, and put them back into storage. The next thing is storage. I really like the countertop knife block. A drawer knife block is an adequate solution, and a magnetic raw thing on the wall is adequate as well, as long as you use it correctly. Please avoid any situation where it's loose in a drawer where it will get banged around. One thing to understand is that the working part of this blade is the most fragile part of the knife. So when you dunk it in the, stick it in the knife, stick it in the dishwasher, when it's loose in a drawer, when you toss it or leave it in the sink, it's gonna bang it up, and you might not even notice it, but it's because you run the risk of damaging the working part of the blade. The next thing is what the surface that you use. My recommendation is an end grain cutting board. They're kind of expensive. The next best thing is a wood cutting board. And I'd ask you not to go to anything else. Like I mentioned about the hardness, if you use a glass cutting board, or if you're cutting on a ceramic plate, one pass is all it takes to cause severe damage or ruin the edge of the knife. The mechanism that looks like is either the edge folds over or it chips away. And those are things that we can, to some extent, restore with a hone, but you're going to be doing yourself a big favor in edge longevity if you don't let your knife touch surfaces like that are harder than the steel in the knife. A wood cutting board is the best option there. Plastic cutting boards definitely have their place, especially for handling raw meat and such. So I hope that addresses that. And lastly, please make sure you hone often, right? Like, that's the whole point of this video. I would say that I don't know if anybody could over hone their knife. So please don't fear that you're doing it too much, especially if you're following the guidelines that I've outlined in this video. Thank you so much. I hope you found that helpful. Please do all the things that help me and don't cost you anything, such as hitting the subscribe button, the thumbs up, the bell, and leave a comment to say, hey, I really appreciate that video, or reach out to me in any way. There are other ways to support me that you'll find in the description below. Thank you so much.